Hey everyone, can everyone hear me? Good morning, DAOFest. How's everyone doing today? Does this work? No? Hello? Well, cool. Thanks for getting up early today and coming out for this talk. My name is Aaron Soskin, like they were saying before, and I am the founder of a company called Govern. And today we're going to be talking about how to go from democracy to DAOmocracy. I'm glad I hear a couple chuckles, all about that pun life. All right, so this is a really exciting time for us, and we think it's a really cool opportunity about how we can start to enable the next generation of democracy. So really fast, who is Aaron? I'm going to see if this mic works. Hello? 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 Can you hear me? Way better. All right, thank you guys. Cool, so who is Aaron? That's me. I'm that guy. I was born in the Bay Area. I grew up in Sacramento, but I currently live in San Francisco. When I was a kid, my dream job was to be an astronaut, which, with the price of Ethereum lately, we're going to the moon, so I'm not exactly wrong. Previous jobs, management consultant, I was a dairy farmer and a production assistant. Started in blockchain 3 years ago, and my fun fact / hot take is that ranch dressing is actually the best condiment on the world. There's no food that ranch dressing cannot go on. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to have 4 different sections. We're going to talk about we're first going to show you the trust is broken with our politicians today. 2, I'm going to show you why trust is broken. 3, we're going to talk about where PACs started. And 4, we're going to talk about the fix for these PACs. And ultimately, if you remember nothing else from my talk today, I want you to remember these 3 truths, these 3 takeaways, all right? 1, political campaigns are expensive. 2, it's an incentives problem, not a politics problem. And 3, we need to stop pushing when we should be pulling. Okay? So key takeaway number 1, political campaigns are expensive. Not only are they expensive to win, they are very expensive to lose as well. In the midterms, 2018, this wasn't even a presidential election, the average winner in the House spent over $2 million, and in the Senate, over $15.7 million. And the loser spent almost $1 million in the House, and in the Senate close to $10 million. Now, these are only the losers, the second place losers. This doesn't even factor into account the third place loser, fourth place loser, fifth place loser. So for better or for worse, political campaigns are really expensive to both win and lose. And the unfortunate thing is, the cost of elections are only going up. This is the price of the election that the average winner has spent in both the House and the Senate over the past 20 years. And the reason that it's a problem that the cost is going up, besides just the churn of amount of money spent doing nothing, is this. This is a very important graph. What this shows, I know the resolution's not great, but this is a graph that shows the correlation between if you spend more and your chances of winning the election. And what it shows is that over the last 20 years, at least 80% of the time, the person that spends more money wins the election. 80% of the time, the person that spends more money wins the election. Now, take this with a grain of salt. This is a correlation and not a causation. That being said, if you are a politician and you see this graph, what is it that you're going to start to optimize for? Which is why this is what happens. This is a proposed agenda the DNC would give freshman DNC congressmen. So a freshman DNC congressman would come into play, DNC party would give them this and say, this is what your schedule should be every single day. And 4 hours a day, 50% of their time is blocked off for call time. This is dialing for dollars. This is raising money for re-election. This is insane. It is insane. There is a proposed agenda that you have to spend 50% of your time raising money for re-election. If any job in the world, you had to spend 50% of your time to raise money for re-election or for your job next year, you would do a bad job at that job. I would do a bad job if I had to spend 50% of my time negotiating my next year's salary, right? And this does not help the fact that we don't trust politicians. When we see politicians dialing for dollars, it lowers our trust, and we also already don't trust politicians. So Pew Research Center has been tracking over the last 60 years the percent of Americans who think that politicians do the right thing all of the time or most of the time. And we are at an all-time low right now at 17%. And the crazy thing to me about this graph is that it doesn't really matter whether it's a Republican or Democrat in charge. Our trust in politicians, for them to do the right thing at least most of the time, goes down with almost every administration. And if only 17% of Americans trust politicians to do the right thing, what does that mean about our political system? The problem, though, is that the trust problem goes both ways. The OpenGov Foundation did this huge study where they went into a bunch of campaign offices and congressional offices, and they studied how does the feedback loop work when constituents reach out to politicians. And what they found is that even when politicians did respond to constituent concerns, only 50% of the time would the constituent even open up the email. So it's a problem on both sides of the coin. Politicians aren't engaging in us, we aren't engaging with politicians, and there's this massive breakdown in trust. And ultimately, this leads to us not helping politicians fund these really expensive campaigns. Again, in 2018, only 24% of members of Congress had at least 10% of donations come from small dollar donors. That number shrinks quickly to 1.1% when we talk about at least 50% coming from small dollar donors. So what does that look like? If this represents every member of Congress, everything in purple has only 10% of donations coming from small dollar donors, and only this, everything in green, is at least 50%. So that means politicians are being funded by big money donors and PACs. And you can say that it's bad that that's where the funding comes from, but maybe it's also bad that we are not providing them an alternative source of funding, right? Which really becomes a problem when they look at this graph. Because if I know and I'm a politician that my campaign is expensive and that my small dollar donations aren't coming in, then I'm going to do this. And the ironic thing is, the crazy ironic thing is, politicians hate this. They absolutely hate this. They were interviewed about how much they hate dialing for dollars. And a congressperson, John Larson, described the experience of dialing for dollars as the same as sticking bamboo shoots up his fingernails. It is terrible. They hate this process of dialing for dollars. They hate the fact that they have to spend 50% of their time fundraising. That's not why they ran for office. They ran for office to solve constituent issues, which leaves us at this prisoner's dilemma. We all love prisoner's dilemma, right? And ultimately, politicians have a finite amount of time. They can spend it fundraising, or they can spend it solving constituent issues. We as constituents can either donate to politicians, or we can disengage. All right, and so ultimately, we want to elect people that fix issues, and we want to donate to people that fix issues, right? So really, we're stuck in these three quadrants, right? One, where the constituent doesn't give money. If we're in quadrant number 2, the constituent doesn't give money, and the politician fixes the issue, and they don't win for re-election. Quadrant 3, we give money, they don't fix the issue, and we're left holding the bag. Or 4, which ends up happening the majority of the time, which is we don't give money, politicians don't fix our issues. That's what happens, right? And it's a problem because of this and this, which means we're left here, right? We're constituents, we're looking at our politicians, and they're following big money donors and PACs, because that's where the money is coming from. And this is a really important point to realize. We don't think people are inherently bad. Besides bad actors, we don't believe politicians don't want to work for us. Politicians and constituents don't inherently distrust and disengage. They're just acting per what the system incentivizes. Politicians don't want to ignore our concerns, but that's just the process that we've set into play, which is where we get to key takeaway number 2. This isn't a political problem. This is an incentive problem. It doesn't matter whether we vote in Democrats, Republicans, or independents. We're going to run into this issue as long as this is the process that we've incentivized, right? And this is the core argument to how we actually fix the current system, right? Which leads us to a very big realization we had. Whether we like it or not, PACs and big money donors are so successful because they solve a lot of the incentive problems for politicians. So let's stop for a second, all right? And let's ask ourselves then, how did PACs actually start? They're very successful at what they do. Why did they come into being? How did they get so powerful? And PACs actually started in 1944. And the first PAC was the Congress of Industrial Organizations to raise money for the re-election of Franklin D. Roosevelt. The CIO was actually a group of industrial unions that got together to help encourage FDR to support union members. And the rules of the first PAC were that the PAC's money had to come from voluntary contributions of the union members rather than the union treasuries themselves. Voluntary contributions of the members. This raises the question, is this a DAO or is this a PAC? To me, it sounds a lot more like a DAO. A group of people getting together, not coming from the corporate coffers, but rather everyone contributing voluntarily for a joint objective, for a joint purpose. Sounds like a DAO, which is why I spend most of my weekends doing this, just preaching that DAOs are a better version of PACs. And while I was preaching this one weekend, I had an idea, which is what if instead of fighting campaign finance, what if instead of fighting big money donors, we just used it to our advantage, right? Ultimately, big money donors figured out how to make campaign finance work for them. PACs figured out how to make campaign finance work for them. Lobbyists figured out how to make campaign finance work for them. Why can't we? Which gets us to key takeaway number 3, which is we need to stop pushing when we should be pulling. Why are we fighting campaign finance when it can work for us? Campaign finance isn't the problem. The problem with campaign finance is that it's not equal access to everyone, and that we as individuals have not figured out how to take advantage of it for ourselves. So, what if we go down this train of thought a little bit more? What if we just accept for one moment that money is going to be in politics? Instead of fighting it, instead of trying to get all this money out of politics, because it is very hard to get politicians to vote for money out of politics once they've been elected, because we don't incentivize it, what if we just accept it and say, how do we take advantage of it for everybody? So we can start to use the same tools and leverages that PACs and big money donors have access to. Okay, what's the next step in that? And we're able to say, we can create an opportunity to make PACs, make everybody as powerful as PACs and big money donors. Essentially what we can do is we can turn everybody into their own PAC and everybody into your own lobbyist. We can reduce the barriers to entry, which depends on this big fact is, are people really engaged? And we actually believe they are. They're just not engaged in politics. And this is really key. Only 12% of Americans donated to politicians in 2016. 69% of Americans donated to nonprofits. Sure, you can chalk some of that up to tax write-offs, but that's the truth. 69, close to 70% of people are donating to nonprofits. We want change. We're ready for it, and we're actually engaging in donating. We just don't trust politicians. So the broke solution would say that people should start more PACs. The woke solution, right, is that people should actually run more DAOs. And I'm actually not the first person to think of this. Does anyone know who this is? This is James Madison, and he was the first person to propose that everyone should be in their own DAO, or rather faction is what he called it, but it was a DAO. And ultimately, James Madison would have been a member of James DAO, and that is the truth. You guys know what James DAO is? Yeah? James Madison would have been a member of James DAO, and that is the truth. And James Madison wrote something, was part of this group that wrote the Federalist Papers. And he wrote extensively about why everyone should be their own DAO in Federalist Paper number 10, okay? And what Federalist Paper number 10 says, I'm going to summarize it right now. If you haven't read number 10, go read number 10. There's a lot of papers. Number 10 is the most important, all right? People are going to naturally divide into factions based off their interests, okay? That's going to happen no matter what. 2, there are causes and effects to every faction. We will never be able to limit the causes, so maybe we can limit the effects. And in order to reach consensus across factions, you either need to control the causes or the effects. And that the Madisonian ideal was that everyone would have equal access and opportunity to create their own factions and have equalized effects. And if that was the case, ultimately all these factions would end up balancing each other out. And that as long as you allowed everybody to join factions and everyone to have the similar effects, it would be fine. But what Madison didn't realize is that we don't live in a perfect world, right? And right now, not everyone has equal access to factions or capital to create fair factions, right? So what do? Ultimately, we're left with two options. We can either limit everybody's access to create factions and their associated effects, or we can actually enhance everyone and equalize everyone's access, right? And that's what we're talking about. It's not about reducing and making everyone go down to the least common denominator. It's actually about enhancing and putting everyone on the same playing field, all right? So how do we get there? And we've actually already done some experimentation in this space, which is really cool. Has anyone heard of Yang DAO? Were people in Yang DAO? Any Yang DAO members? See a couple hands, love that, right? And Yang DAO was a good experiment, right? Here are some stats on it. Shout out to DAO House. If you guys haven't checked out DAO House, go check out DAO House. It's the coolest way to launch DAOs. Anyways, just some stats. There's $3,500 in the bank. We had 34 members, all right? And it had a lot of, at the beginning, a lot of engagement. But we also had a lot of learnings. And if you go to yangdao.org, this is the page that ends up coming up, right? And there's a lot of learnings we can take from this Yang DAO experiment. And the truth is, DAOs are getting better, but they're still hard. I can talk about, from my perspective, one of the biggest learnings I had from Yang DAO is that it's not enough to create economic coordination tools. PACs don't just get a bunch of money together in a pot and say, cool, we have all this money in a pot. They say, we have all this money, now what are we going to go do with it? And they actually incentivize members to go and do specific things with this capital, right? So DAOs are getting hard, or getting better, but they're still hard, which leaves us to levels of enlightenment, okay? And there are 4 levels of political enlightenment we have to go through. Current campaign finance. Second one is outcome-based donations. Third is issue-based DAOs. And 4th is public funding for public goods. I'm not going to be able to get to the 4th one today, but I'm going to talk about the first 3, okay? We're currently here, current campaign finance. It's not working that well. I know I feel frustrated with it. I'm sure a lot of you guys do. What we're trying to do is get to here, which is the first step in our way to DAOs. It's called outcome-based donations. And this is actually what we're building at Govern right now. And what an outcome-based donation is it's donations that are held in escrow contracts until predefined community metrics are reached. What does this mean? This means, let's say you care about education. Like I care about education, and I live in San Francisco. I can go donate $100 to the mayor of San Francisco if high school graduation rates go up by 2% within the next 2 years. And only if high school graduation rates go up by 2% in the next 2 years does the mayor of San Francisco get my $100 donation. And if she doesn't hit that metric, I can choose to send my donation to any political opponent or to a nonprofit that's working in the space right now. Ultimately, what this does is it's giving us the same tools that lobbyists and PACs have access to, right? And ultimately, what we start to do is level the playing field between special interest groups and constituents. Because remember, this is an incentive problem. It's not a politics problem. And when you use outcome-based donations, what we're able to do is set aside money and tell the politician, hey, instead of spending 50% of your time fundraising, spend more of your time solving these issues. Because I now have a huge pot of money, $10,000, waiting for you for once you solve this issue, for once you need to run for re-election. And you no longer are all about running for re-election. You get to do what you do best, which is governing and providing solutions. Because we know you hate this. We know you hate this, and we hate this as well. So when we work together and not opposed and make sure politics isn't the zero-sum game it is now, we can start to improve to this future, right? Which is that when PACs are going to be looking at the politicians, we're going to be looking at us at outcome-based donations. Because not only are we better than PACs, it's a more efficient way to do campaign finance. Because you don't have to spend all of this time fundraising and raising money just to go around the country. So again, going to start wrapping up. These are the 3 takeaways you need to remember. If you don't remember my name, don't remember Govern, remember these 3 things on how we fix democracy. 1, campaigns are expensive. We can't change that fact. 2, this is an incentive problem. It's not a politics problem. 3, we need to stop pushing when we should be pulling. Why fight this massive force? Why fight this infrastructure instead of using it to our advantage? These are the 3 things I want you to remember. If you like what I had to say, we're launching our beta in the next 2 weeks, right? It's a really exciting time. So please come join our beta. If you scan this QR code, it'll take you to a place you can put in your email, or feel free to email or telegram me to tell you how to get involved. Ultimately, what we're building is not just the next change in campaign finance, but the next generation of democracy. One where we don't have to trust our politicians to always do the right thing. One where we can live in this trustless scenario, where we can work with our politicians and make sure politicians and constituents are on the same team. Thanks so much. I'll be around today for any questions.